Hello, welcome to Interface. Our guest today is Professor Ayesha Kidwai, who is a professor in Jawaharlal Nehru University in linguistics. At the same time, she's a person who has been very actively involved in the Anti-Sexual Harassment Committee of the university. And Professor Ayesha is a person who has been traveling the length and breadth of India, looking at cases of sexual harassment in the universities, which has turned out to be a very, very critical problem encountered in many of the institutions of higher learning in India. So, Ayesha, let me ask you, how relevant or how important is Anti-Sexual Harassment Committee and its work in the present Indian context?
Well, it is of fundamental importance. One challenge before all countries and in places that want to be democratic is that not only should there be equality of opportunity, but also equality of access. While our constitutional measures implement a lot of giving equality of opportunity, sexual harassment affects the access that individuals, particularly women, might have to education. In the society we live in, which is patriarchal, where there is a lot of discrimination that starts from the home, education offers one opportunity of release and of breaking out of that cycle. When in an educational institution, sexual harassment happens, that immediately forces inward, an inward retreat, if you want. Women cannot complain, their performances in their work are immediately affected, and a very male and a very repressive character of the institution can become the work culture. So, to address really essentially questions of productivity, also of course of human rights and of a society that we aspire to, looking at sexual harassment as a serious problem is absolutely of the essence.
How long has it been since this Anti-Sexual Harassment Committee has been, the guidelines it has evolved have been implemented in our universities? So, and how supportive has been UGC of the whole concept?
So, as you know, the Vishaka judgment from August 1997 of the Supreme Court was instrumental in giving birth to sexual harassment law in this in our country. The Supreme Court also in subsequent orders said that until legislation is passed for this process, right, to implement anti-sexual harassment committees, the orders that it had issued were binding. In 1998 itself, the then UGC chairperson and the Women's Studies committee passed notified to universities that they should have institute these committees immediately, which gave them student and teacher representation. So, the first step in universities was one which was more or less democratic in character, which wanted to build together a consensus in the institution against a gender discriminatory atmosphere and for effective resolution of complaints of sexual harassment. This has been, and since then there have been a number of court cases asking the government, asking for implementation of these guidelines, and the UGC has did notify them to all institutions. However, compliance with these institution norms have been, there's either lip service, right? So, people appoint a sexual harassment committee, but nobody knows about it. It receives no complaints, and given the reality of India, it's impossible to think of a situation where there is no sexual harassment in societies as riven as ours on these lines. In 2013, in the immediate aftermath of the popular mobilization and protests around the rape case of the Nirbhaya rape, the UGC constituted, since university campuses were so involved in it, especially those in Delhi were so involved in the protest, it instituted a committee headed by which was Measures look into measures for the protection and safety of women on campuses. This committee met for over a year, headed by Mary John and Meenakshi Gopinath. I was a member of that. And we have drafted an elaborate set of guidelines, which are to take care of a whole range of issues besides sexual harassment, gender sensitization courses, the kind of infrastructure, etc., that you need, that must be guaranteed so that campuses are safe and secure for women.
Is that report which is called Saksham report?
Yes.
You're referring to that?
I'm referring to the Saksham report.
One thorny issue that has often been encountered is how to define sexual harassment. There is a huge difference pointed out between sexual harassment and gender discrimination. So how do you, how has the committee, kind of conceived and defined?
Our thinking on this matter has always been really defined by the Vishakha judgment, which, and now the Sexual Harassment Act from 2013. Both of these, there's a whole history of sexual harassment law that comes from places outside India.
Right.
And it's the insights of those legal traditions and actually implementations that have gone into defining sexual harassment. The most important thing about sexual harassment is that the behavior must be sexually determined with some kind of sexual motivation and must be unwelcome. In this definition, unwelcome physical contacts or advances, or sexually colored remarks,
even verbal.
Anything verbal, or even just leering, gazing, up to an outright request for sexual favors, are all covered. Traditionally, in the legal system of the world, this is called hostile working environment sexual harassment, because it makes the conditions for a woman to her workplace unacceptable and inimical to her to continue. A more extreme form of sexual harassment is what is called quid pro quo sexual harassment, where the demand for sexual favors is accompanied with a threat that if you do not submit, then you will be disadvantaged or even advantaged in your employment. So our understanding here in India now is in these two areas, but the Sexual Harassment Act has actually extended who can ask for this redress in a very interesting way. It's not only a complainant. So somebody acting on her behalf, or if the woman is dead, her kin can also ask for redress. Or it could be even a women's group.
Right.
Because a number of cases that have appeared in the recent 10 years or so, there is the Ruchika Girotra case where the young woman committed suicide and her friend took up.
Right.
So to enable that, even to understand that it is not only an individual who is being redressed, but a social wrong that is being remedied.
How forthcoming have been the women students after these anti-sexual harassment guidelines have been kind of popularized among the institutions of higher learning? One question is how welcome or how ready have been our institutions of higher learning to implement these things, and even after they have implemented or they have this committee in force, how empowered or enabled are the women students to come and launch complaints? What have you been your experience after being?
See, in my own experience, my university, Jawaharlal Nehru University, had a head start because we had started working on the need for such a policy group of students and teachers well before actually the Vishakha judgment came as well. And we are a small campus, and generally it was easier to do so. We got our committee in 1999, but even for us it was a huge learning curve. Elsewhere, committees have mostly been, just appointed notionally in response
to these UGC directions.
Yes. And this is most recently evident where in Delhi, the Delhi Commission for Women asked for statistics from universities as to how much, how many complaints. This is in the law that the government department concerned must have a sorry, it's the Ministry of Women and Child, must have a, ask the institutions what is happening with your sexual harassment cases. And it turns out that in of the universities in that region, JNU has the most number of complaints, 50 over 3 years.
Is it because only JNU is ready to accept?
Yes. So now there are two ways that you can look at it, that you can see that JNU is a den of sexual harassment, right? Or that it has an effective complaints committee. So the short answer to your question is, women will come forward to complain if the institution shows that it will be ready to act.
Yes.
On matters of, on complaints of sexual harassment. Wherever women have got message that this is just a notional committee.
Yes. Actually, that is a sad case in India, and very often, many places, it's a notional committee. So how do you get this to act? How do you get this committee to act? Is there some kind of a monitoring authority that kind of, measures or has institutionalized certain measures?
So, in the Act institutionalizes certain measures, and it makes the government department in charge of asking for reports. But also it says that if you have a notional, it has a various tiers of committees.
Yeah.
So there's going to be a workplace internal committee, and also something which is called a local committee, which the government has failed to set up, which is at a district or a block level, where you can actually go to either committee. You can go to your institutional committee, you can go to the local committee. Unfortunately, none of the government hasn't, as far as I know, implemented the local committees. But also at the same time, when there, institutional monitoring can also be done by funding agencies like the UGC.
Right.
And in our proposals to the UGC, we've suggested that they should themselves have a cell that monitors.
Right. They don't have a cell as yet?
They don't have a cell as yet. And that they should, because frequently what I understand happens is that when colleges complains or universities don't listen to complainants write to the UGC or any other funding authority.
Yes.
So we hope that the UGC will, it's been now 2 years, so we are waiting for it to.
Yeah, since you submitted the Saksham report.
And so
what is the status of it? Is it being discussed and?
Well, we hear that, periodically reminders are sent out asking for for the implementation of the recommendations. It's a, a whole series spanning across many parts of the university framework. And we expect that implementation will happen and that there will be effective monitoring.
Okay, all right.
Because in places where committees have started, and they very assiduously, very sincerely inquire into cases. And even when a complaints committee finds against respondents, but particularly if he is politically powerful, either no action is taken,
right,
or the courts are used as a means to stymie the
delay the process also.
And this all exacts a tremendous cost on the complainant, because usually in many places women do not complete their studies, right? And even if we've seen actually across India that complaints committees are not given the powers that they should have.
What are those powers? Could you just...
Well, so one is complete autonomy. By the Vishaka judgment and by the Sexual Harassment Act, the committee has to be 50% women and headed by a woman. It must represent more than one level of the administration. Now, in universities, it's absolutely essential that this cannot be only teachers. There's non-teaching staff, there's officers, and of course, there's students.
And are there members of the public present there in the committee?
No.
It's completely...
So, one is the first complete guarantee that there will be representative.
Okay.
And in the Saksham report, keeping the idea of what the university and the workplace is, we insisted that this representational nature must be absolutely key to establishing. This is not prescribed by the law. So that power to actually be autonomous of the administration, and the act is very clear that the committee submits its report and the employer must submit a parallel report about action taken.
Okay.
However, in practice, what happens is that the committee submits its report and no action is taken, and there is no monitoring on that. The committee also has powers to give interim relief. So, starting from Vishaka, there was, if it's a woman employee working in a particular department where she has made a complaint of sexual harassment, she has the right to either ask for her transfer or that other person to be transferred, and the right to take leave which is, in excess. Typically, what happens is the first thing they do is they shunt the woman out. And leaving the, because evidence is, or at least some corroboratory testimony, is to be found in her part of the workplace. So, she gets cut off. Right? And she has no access to the witnesses, whereas hierarchical superiors do.
They do.
So, actually implementing a fair process. So, very few committees have very detailed rules. Right, because they have the nature of a domestic inquiry, but they are very, it's a sensitive matter, which can cause psychological trauma. So, implementing that is, such powers, the ability to get access all documents. Right, this is something that universities and workplaces very rarely give, the right to command all documents. And the fact of the matter is that once the complaints committee does its job, how the employer initiates action, right, is no longer in the committee's control or jurisdiction. So, committees are frequently just completely stymied, though they do their best to help complainants and do impartial inquiries. If people are not guilty, then they say they are not guilty. But whether it's not leading to an atmosphere where there is actually redressal.
So, when we are talking about redressal, that's another very, very knotty issue in this. How do you kind of, decide upon what is the action or what is the penalty? I don't know whether it's the right word. In other words, what is the sense of justice? How is the justice given to the woman in terms of how do we understand that? Is it in terms of a concrete punishment to the offender, or what are the different kinds of punishment? Is it correctional or is it punitive? I mean, what is the nature? Because after all, they are students, and I think the offenders will also be students,
or
teachers to faculty also. So, what has been your experience of this?
The Act has introduced a scheme for compensation as well.
Compensation too?
Monetary compensation, considering the loss of career of a woman, the mental trauma, any medical expenses, etc. that she may have. But in a university institution, one has to conceive of the range of penalties to be extremely wide-ranging. Because as you said, we want some certainly to be corrective. We want people a chance to reform, to repent, and also just to learn, that this was the behavior that I brought to the classroom or the playground is not. But the first concern and the primary focus must be immediately to provide relief to the complainant. So, the important thing is that the committee must act on the receipt of a complaint. What the JNU committee does is, as soon as it receives a complaint, within 2 working days, it sends what we call an order of restraint to the person who has been charged with sexual harassment, saying that you cannot talk about this case, you cannot publicize it, you must not approach the complainant.
Oh, really?
And this restraint order has proved very, very successful. Because
this order of restraint is common to all anti-sexual harassment committees, or just in JNU?
In JNU, but that's something that the Saksham committee has recommended that you explore. And our experience has been that what this means is, because the restraint order also says that if you violate this order, then you will be, this will be added to your list of offenses. Right? And if we can, of course, prove it. Now, because the anatomy of a sexual harassment event is like this, that, woman complains and then a huge amount of pressure is invested upon her, either through family or through teachers or through caste groups, and she's told, no, don't, he has a wife, he has a child, or what will happen to your career, the shame and the blame. And what the restraint order does is take away that pressure from the woman. And if she wants other interim relief, even if he wants interim relief, counseling has been offered to both men and women. We don't impose it. So that's the first goal. Now, when you have, particularly first time offences of a relatively minor nature.
Right.
Our committee, and this is our recommendation section, that one should look at creative ways which will help change behavior.
The person,
So, especially amongst young men and young women, there are, love relationships or relational romantic attraction, and learning how to take somebody saying no is also part of the learning process.
Right.
And the committee, even when it does an inquiry, is mindful of that. That when it says that this is the corrective measure. So, in the past, in JNU, what we've done is ask people to be volunteers for the anti-sexual harassment committee. We've also asked them to, go take a course, write an essay, things which will
make them explore.
Make them explore and handle grief. And we use the resources of other students and, experienced people in the university to help people counsel. And cases where we found that there is, really a cause for mental illness, etc., those people are not penalized at all. Rather, what we do is
medical help.
We provide medical help. And so, in such cases of hostile working environment sexual harassment, we try and diffuse the situation. But in cases of what is called quid pro quo sexual harassment, where there is a hierarchical superior who is harassing a student or a junior employee, we do not, we are bound, of course, by the Government of India rules also that sexual harassment is a crime of moral turpitude. Right? So, it by definition attracts a major penalty. So, that's the legal position. But we also believe that the most fundamental trust relation is of a teacher and a student, and the abuse of power by a teacher is not acceptable. And so that, so there are a range of penalties which are harsher
on the teachers.
On the teachers, and following what are within our service rules.
Ayesha, you said that you people have submitted a Saksham report. Already UGC has the set of anti-ragging guidelines, anti-sexual. What is the essential difference between the two? Where is the UGC rules lacking?
So in a component, sexual harassment can be a component of ragging, and they both rub on that nasty, thing of dominance and humiliation of the other. So the motivations of those are both, both come from the same bad place, which is to make people feel small, unwanted to exercise power. Sexual harassment can occur, however, in a situation which is not involved in, you being new in an institution. Right? And can arise out of interpersonal relationships. So, a teacher doesn't rag a student.
No.
Right? But a teacher may sexually harass a student. So, while they are very similar, and sexual harassment is a component, they're not identical. And they represent, actually two different histories. Right. So, ragging, I think, comes from a caste-based society and a desire to inflict that humiliation. Right? But sexual harassment comes from a patriarchal, idea of power and how to control women's bodies, minds, and freedom.
No, so is that the essential difference? I mean, from what is the exact contribution of Saksham report? It elaborates and clarifies this point further?
No, I mean, of course it does that too, but it does a number of things. It looks so, especially after the Nirbhaya movements of December 2012, I'm sure you saw all those people standing with placards saying, we need a change in mindset.
I know.
And so, it's one to understand how the university can be a catalyst in producing a change in mindset. Because just as women come from environments, families and cultures in which they can't say no and they feel ashamed, men too come from cultures in which they are repressed and they are socialized into, behavioral patterns which are actually insulting to women, but that's the only way that they know how to do it. So, the committee proposes a slew of measures including gender sensitization courses, actually writes down full modules,
Okay.
gender sensitization workshops, looks at infrastructure. So, one pitiable fact is that toilets for women are really a rarity in most of our educational institutions. It's some 3:1 ratio.
Right.
Right. So, how our buildings, our campuses,
Spaces
are really hostile to women's health, safety, and freedom of mobility.
Regarding very often these guidelines and these rules they work like a backlash, in the sense like women are more suppressed in order to ensure their safety.
The Saksham report speaks out very strongly against that. And it says that policing and protectionism is a problem, not a solution.
So, Ayesha, that was a very illuminating talk, and I think we need to explore this further. Maybe at the next another interview, maybe we'll be able to talk in detail. And I hope the universities carry forward this particular Saksham report and the UGC guidelines in more effective ways. Thank you.